Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are coming in from today. I'm Jen Whitmer, and I help people create positive cultures with complex people because complex people are all we have. And so I am so excited that you are here today. Let us know where you're coming in from. If you're watching live, if you're catching the replay, hang out in the comments, which should be over here. Or maybe if you're watching online on your phone, it's down here. But let us know where you're coming in from. This is a friendly group of chatty people. So if you've got questions, pop them in there, say hello. I am really excited about our guest today. She is a local friend of mine, which is always fun to have somebody from St. Louis come join me on the show. And Roberta Moore is an expert, and she is a speaker. She is a consultant. She's a coach. She is a delightfully hilarious human being. And I'm so excited to have her on the show today. And she and I are going to have a conversation around EQ. So if you've got questions about emotions, if you've got how emotions work at work, if you've got any of those things, let us know in the comments. Hi, Lisa. And we will make sure that we get to them. For now, let's welcome Roberta.
Hey, Jen. Excited to be here.
So happy you are joining us. So I always like to start with who you are. So if you could just give us a little sketch, a little story of how did you get to doing this? Because what I didn't say in my little intro, friends, if you didn't know, Roberta started out as a CPA. So I always find this fascinating that Roberta went from CPA to emotional expert. So give us a little bit of the gist, Roberta.
Well, thank you for finding it fascinating, Jen, because some people have actually said it's weird, but it makes total sense to me. So I did start out in accounting, first internal in a corporation as an auditor, international auditor, because I used to speak French fairly well, and I got to travel to French-speaking places and audit their books. And then I branched into public because that was a little bit more exciting at the time. And I also had a hand in doing business development. I like to say I was ahead of the curve because a long time ago back in the day, there weren't CPAs doing business development. Along the way, though, my specialty was taxation, and I started to notice that I was always more interested in the people side of the business, more so than the number side of the business. So when people come to talk to you about their money and you're doing an intake for their tax return and you're meeting with them, they might say things, which they did, like, oh, I don't know, but I might be getting a divorce next year, Roberta. What do you think I should do, about my money? Do you have any suggestions? And those are the things that over time I noticed would kind of get me excited and hook me. I'd rather sit there and talk to them about, well, why do you want a divorce? And then what happened? So I decided to go back to school and get a degree in marriage and family therapy, because that's all about relationships and systems theory. And when I started my private practice, I actually started it in North Carolina because that's where I was living at the time. I noticed, Jen, that I started to miss thinking with my business brain. And I'll never forget this one client who came in. He was very high up in banking, and he was really anxious because when I asked, why are you here? He said, my daughter, who was, I think she was in 8th grade. She could have been 8. I just remember the number 8 at the time. Said she was going to kill herself because she got a 98 on her math test instead of a 100. And he asked me to work with the daughter. And so I was doing child-centered play therapy with the daughter. And then because I worked systemically, I brought him in. Anyway, long story short, I learned from this young girl that, well, Daddy doesn't play with me. Daddy's always at work. Daddy doesn't spend time with me. And when I talked to him and interviewed him, then I found out he wasn't communicating well with his daughter, and he wasn't communicating well with his direct reports at work. And I thought, bingo. There's the vehicle to satisfy both my business brain and my psychology brain, emotional intelligence. And then I just looked for which is the best scientifically validated tool out there, in my opinion. And that's how I found the EQI 2.0, and then branched out, got a certification in leadership, specialized coaching, and then EQ. And here we are today.
I love that so much. First of all, I just think there's so much about when you're in a business or in a corporate space, sometimes, especially as a young leader, you get into this role and you're like, I mean, I like this, but gosh, this part of this feels so much more fun. And you were able to make that shift. So I always like to point that out, that like, just because you're there, you're not a tree, you can move. Um, but the other important thing about what you said is that this man who was like, I'm not communicating well with this person at home, and I'm not communicating well with my direct reports at work, because we are whole people. And wherever you go, there you are. And it is likely that the same things are coming up in all of these different spaces in your life. And that's why when I'm working with clients, but either corporate clients or teams, I was just last week doing an event and we were talking about how it's not surprising that there's a certain group here that reflect their leaders. Because
Yes.
that's what we do. That's what we do as people. That's what cultures do. And so like, because of that system that we create. And so I love that that was your discovery point, and you started all of this study. So give us a little bit of a definition. Like, we've kind of thrown around emotions and EQ. And again, if you're in the comments, you've got questions, please like plop them in. How do you define emotional intelligence? What is EQ?
Thank you for asking, because here's my favorite definition, and I came up with it myself. So
I love it. I'm waiting.
Think about having a deck of cards. Think about playing cards. I mean, it could be poker, it could be something else silly, right? It could be Old Maid, I don't know. But if you pretend that each card in the deck is a different emotion, you want to be the one that's shuffling the cards and very thoughtfully, if you could, picking the cards. I know when you play cards, you don't get to see the cards, but in my pretend little game, for my definition, for the sake of explanation, pretend you can see the cards and you can pick which card you want to play very thoughtfully at any given time, and setting the cards playing you. So if each card's an emotion and you're in an emotionally charged meeting or an intense situation, you could be either getting ready to be angry and blow your top or cry, depending on which end of the spectrum you're on. Wouldn't it be nice, instead of that emotion playing you, where you feel like you have no control, no emotional self-regulation, you instead can take a deep breath and choose which is the best emotion to lay on the table and play at this point in time in this situation.
Yeah, I love that definition. And I think it allows for when I'm talking with people, I like to call it agency. Like, I really like to be the one that's in charge of my life. Like, I don't have control over all of this. Like, as I look at you right now, there is construction happening in my backyard that I'm really glad that people can't hear on our live and the podcast later. Like, you can hear it, but I can control how I feel about that, or at least the one that I'm going to choose right now. I may have to deal with other emotions later, but the one in the moment, I have some agency over, which for me, and I'm curious for you, for me, that brings confidence. Like, I know that I'm going to be able to manage this situation and not just lose my ish everywhere. Like, I'm the one who can okay, this is what we're doing. And do you find that when you're working with leaders?
Absolutely, Jen. So you correctly nailed it in the EQI 2.0 model. Self-regard, which is another word for confidence, is the foundational skill. If you don't have enough self-regard, it's going to be really hard to build any of the other skills. So the idea of self-regard is you're able to say, okay, on this hand, I know I'm really great at these things over here. On this hand, maybe I'm not so great, not so much. And I like to say, when you put both together, you can still love and accept yourself. You can still love and accept yourself like that, knowing you're not perfect, but you've got some strengths, you're working on others. That's true self-regard, and that's true empowerment, or you can call it agency, emotional self-regulation, any of those.
Yeah. So, there's always skeptics out there, especially I think for me, as I observe how business culture has shifted and it has rapidly accelerated in the last 4 years or so. Like it was happening before the pandemic, but I think as with all things, the pandemic, just whoosh, things went real fast. And so now I feel like we've got this situation at work where we've got some people who are like, emotions don't belong at work. You leave them at the door. And then you've got other people who are like, I need to bring every bit of me to work without maybe some boundaries. But like, so how do you negotiate the skeptic who's like, I don't need any emotional intelligence. We just show up and do our job, right? Help those people come over to this side of a little bit of a different perspective on how it helps their leadership.
Great question, Jen. I have a lot of in my work. I work a lot of times, not picking on any profession at all, but if you do think about, my former being a CPA, and there's people that are in technology or engineers, they do tend to focus on problem solving and getting their, like I used to get told I was too chatty when I was in public accounting and smiled too much, and they wanted me to keep my head down and just do the work. So imagine that.
Oh, I've never been told that. I don't know what you mean. I don't know.
But I have had recently, there's this whole people, when companies hire me and sometimes individuals hire me right now, I've been getting a lot of calls about tech people or engineering type people or numbers part type people, where the boss is saying they are too quick to fly off the handle.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're not being strategic enough. We need them to be better able to put themselves in the mindset of the board to which they are speaking. And when they give their presentation to the board, that they be succinct, that they be forward thinking, that they're presenting high level strategy. They're not getting caught in the weeds.
Right.
Well, guess what? Those are all EQ skills at the bottom of that. Things like emotional self-awareness, empathy, reality testing, even problem solving is an EQ skill. Mm-hmm. So to those skeptics, you can't get away from it. You might think there's no emotion there, but we are emotional creatures. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, that absolutely. And I love that, like, there's these very specific problems that are created if there is a lack of emotional awareness and a lack of EQ, that if that's why they're created, then we can solve them with some EQ skills. And the ones that I see when I'm working with corporate people and individual clients, a lot of it is employee retention and engagement.
Yes.
Like that's the big one that comes up for in my work when we start talking about emotions. And the other one is culture, like that kind of cultural piece. What kind of place do we want to be? And they're not quite sure because there's this tension between our emotions allowed at work or not. And so I just think that's really interesting that when people can assume that emotions are just an extra rather than we are emotional beings, which is what you said, which is so important. Lisa's got this really great question. If you do get emotional at work, and what I'm going to interpret Lisa is saying is that idea of I have expressed an emotion outwardly, because we're having emotions all the time. So somehow I have expressed an emotion outwardly about what somebody has done. How do you handle that? And especially part two of that question is women as leaders are now labeled unprofessional because we've expressed an emotion. So how do you help people with that? How do you help organizations and how do you help individuals?
All right. Thank you, Lisa, for the question. So one of the concepts I talk to people about and have an exercise for is emotional triggers. We all get triggered. So number one, if you know that if you have a human brain, you have a part of the brain called the amygdala, it's not just you, everybody has it. And right. So even the other person on the other side of the conversation has an amygdala. So don't try to not trigger because you're going to trigger. Everybody does. It's more important. What do you do after you trigger? Mm-hmm. And so after you trigger, you want to slow things down as much as possible. So you can take some deep breaths. A lot of times people can't even tell. They just think you're thinking, right? Or you're formulating a response. Mm-hmm. You're doing your belly breathing. It's calming the central nervous system. And then inside your head, you can be doing debate, dispute, dismiss, because you're probably having a negative thought. So if you're wanting to cry or something, it could be, I'm not good enough. Some people think, oh, that person's stupid, and they're thinking it inside their head. If you can reframe it to something more positive, okay, deep breath. I don't have to pay attention to this negative voice. It's just the amygdala. One of my clients calls it Niggy. She named it Niggy. It's just Niggy.
Niggy's nagging again. I love it.
Yeah. And then, okay, how can I better approach this?
Yeah.
And it's your recovery. More people are going to pay attention to the fact that you recovered and now you're responding instead of reacting, and they'll forget about the reaction. But we get stuck in our heads thinking, oh, I look really bad now because of this reaction I had.
Oh, that's really, really good. Like that people will remember that you had the ability to stop and pivot rather than that you were human to begin with. I think that's
exactly
really important. That's an important thing to know. And I mean, learning how to stop and reframe in the moment and make a different card choice, back to your illustration, is actually that higher level skill. That's that you're still being human. We're not denying our humanity. You're not denying the emotion, but you're coming back and saying, okay, here's how I want to approach this in this moment. And I can deal with, because those negative stories are going to come up. This weekend, good night. I was working with, I was in a business intensive with my new COO and a coach, working through calendaring and strategy and like the next 6 months of the business and the systems that go with that. So everything's real streamlined. And we got to this one point where I was like, that is terrifying to me. Like I'm starting to tear up. And I was realizing it was this old story that was, you just want this all to be about you. It's just the Jen show. And it was like this really nasty voice that was literally said out loud to me one time. And, but that wasn't true. That wasn't the purpose of what we were doing, but I was not serving someone well because I wanted to deal with that negative voice. But at some point you got to deal with the negative voice.
Oh, yes.
In the moment,
yes,
you can recover and choose that card. And
because
I think that's so powerful.
Jen, you're so right. Because if you ignore that negative voice, what happens? It's like your snooze alarm. It gets louder, 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 louder. That's why you've got to turn to it and confront it. And a lot of times it's debate, dispute, dismiss the negative thoughts. What else could be true? What could be more true? And like you got to it. What could be more true than, oh, this is just all about me. It's the Jen show. What's more true is somebody said that to me when I was younger and they were wrong.
Yeah. And in that moment, what I realized is while I was feeling this fear, what I wanted more was to serve people, was to help people in their businesses and help them do the work that I do, which is help them retain employees, help them have a better culture, help them solve conflict and understand their teams better. And I wasn't showing up to do that well. It was preventing me from something. So then I got a little angry because I was like, now I've got, that move from that fear where you get frozen into like, ooh, I have an action. And it was not an anger at somebody. It was an anger of, I am allowing this to prevent me from doing my job really well. And so that's a different way because often I think we shy away from anger sometimes, but that's a positive use of that emotion. And so I just love what you're saying. And I think there are so many practical experience of that. And we've all been in a meeting where we're like, ooh, that person is having a moment, So what do you do when you're on the other end of that? When somebody else is like, they aren't experiencing their own healthy EQ, what do you do on the other side?
You can help diffuse it by using the skill of empathy, which some people have heard as reflective listening. But it's just people want to be seen, heard, and understood. So if you can acknowledge that person, oh, something's going on for you. You must be upset. Tell me about that. What's going on for you right now? You want to go into it, recognize, acknowledge what's going on. That usually helps calm the person down. And the trick for you on the other side is try to be curious.
Absolutely.
Without being judgmental. Having a curious, empathetic tone, not a harsh, too many people get harsh back in response, and that's going to further trigger somebody.
Right. Then we're all like, then it just becomes like gasoline on the fire. And, you know, nobody wants that in that space. Cause yeah, there's such a difference between saying, hey, I'm noticing something's really happening for you right now. You seem elevated, or can you tell me more? Than what is wrong right now with you? Even though the question is similar, it's not a curious place. And that's not the way we want to do that. Okay, I just looked at the time, and we are we are so up against our time, and you just need to come back, Roberta. We're gonna cover more
I'd
time
love to.
because we need to keep this conversation going. But I would love for you who are listening, those of you who are watching the replay, those of you who are on live, come and let's let Roberta, I'm going to blah, blah, blah a little bit. You have to connect with Roberta. So Roberta, tell us what you do, how you can help us, and like how to find you. This is her website. How do we connect with you and continue this conversation?
Well, thank you, Jen. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, of course, and you can find me through my website, which you see right there below. Mm-hmm. I also, if you forget the title of my book, which can be found on Amazon, it is on my website. My website points to the shop on Amazon. It's Emotion at Work, Unleashing the Secret Power of Emotional Intelligence. And in that book, there are true stories of different clients that I've worked with, where we started, what we did, where they ended up. Names have changed, circumstances changed to protect the innocent, and lots of exercises in that book so that you can get started on developing your own EQ. And I do one-on-one coaching. I do workshops. I do assessments. I have lots of fun helping people change their emotional intelligence.
Oh, I love it. You are such a great resource. I know here in St. Louis and even outside of the city, of course, and the region, you do so much work with great people. I learned today that you were at French. Like, I didn't even know that. And so that's really amazing. Please connect with Roberta on LinkedIn. She's a fantastic resource. I will make sure to link Roberta's book as well in the show notes, and you can find her here on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for being here today. I really, really appreciate it. And she is so fun. And as I always love to enjoy joy. Next week, Matt Heller is going to come on, and we're going to be talking about being a new leader or helping new leaders. Matt has spent years in the entertainment industry, and specifically around theme parks, like think Six Flags and Worlds of Fun. I'm so excited. He'll be here next week live at 1 p.m. Eastern. I hope you can join us then. I still haven't announced the new fun thing that is coming. So just know that in September, this is going to change a little bit. If you've been paying attention, you might have a guess about it. But please keep coming, because we're gonna announce that really, really soon. Roberta, thanks again for being here today.
Thanks so much. My pleasure, Jen. It's always so fun to be with you.
Oh, I love being with you too. Can't wait to see you around town. And for those of you who are here in the comments, thanks so much for being live and showing up on the replay too. Come back next week.